So on the frontal lobe, remember that central sulcus divides frontal lobe from parietal lobe. So if you look at that first gyrus, which we call the precentral gyrus in red, all the way across both hemispheres, left and right hemisphere, that's called your primary motor cortex. That's on your precentral gyrus, and you only see half of it here. The blue is on the parietal lobe behind it, so just imagine this on both sides. Imagine this was all red. That is your primary motor cortex. It's on the precentral gyrus, and you're looking at these weird parts of the body here. Is when I say weird, just odd sizes. The hand is huge compared to the rest of the body here. The face is large. That's called a motor homunculi. That's how much of the brain is represents each part of the body. So for example, we have a lot of motor control in our hands, right? Because that's what we do most of our actions with, our hands, and speech and facial expressions, where the rest of our muscles is really just posture and holding us up and moving us around. So that's why there's more representation for the face and the hand than all the rest of the body. That's called the motor homunculi, is this image that you see right here. But more specifically, you want to match the frontal lobe, specifically the primary motor cortex in red here, which is on the precentral gyrus, for control of your voluntary movement. All right, and what else do we see in the frontal lobe? Well, we had the primary motor cortex on the last slide, which we see in this red here. Anterior to it, also in red, is called the premotor area. That's your staging area. So before we perform a voluntary movement, we know that begins on the primary motor cortex. We have to plan the movement. What muscles need to be used? How many motor units need to be used, right? All this planning and the staging takes place in the premotor area. Don't worry about the frontal eye fields. Prefrontal cortex, yeah, that's your cognitive function, that's your personality, short-term memory. But one more important area is called the Broca's area. Broca we see here. It's typically only on the left side. It's on the frontal lobe, and that's responsible for movements, responsible for speech, meaning all the muscles needed to produce speech is controlled in Broca's area. It's not understanding speech. That's going to be another area later, but this is motor or movements or muscles, all those M's, right, responsible for speech. So really think of the frontal lobe mainly as your motor function. We got the premotor cortex, right, got the premotor area. Broca's area is motor or movements, right, for speech, and then of course personality, mainly up front here in the prefrontal cortex. Now when we move to the parietal lobe, back here, now we kind of switch from motor, which was in the frontal lobe, to sensory. But what sensory aspects are we talking about here? Well, that postcentral gyrus, remember the central sulcus divides frontal and parietal lobe? Well, the postcentral gyrus right here is where somatosensation takes place. And these are the sensations that come from, just think of the receptors in your skin, right? From touch, from pressure, pain, vibrations, deep pressure, right? All of those sensations that come from all around your body, they're all listed here, right? Are processed in this somatosensory area. It also has a homunculus, just like the primary motor cortex does, where parts of the body are represented on this gyrus right here, on the postcentral gyrus. So yeah, we're in the parietal lobe, somatosensation, think sensory, from all of these senses, right? General senses throughout the body, not special senses, which we'll get to a little later. And then we have one more important area that's a little bit in the temporal lobe as well, but also includes the parietal lobe that's outlined here in this dotted line. That's Wernicke's area, and that's comprehension of speech. So this area right here is understanding speech. Remember Broca's area? That's motor for speech. That's movements associated with speech. But Wernicke's area is your ability to understand what's being said to you, comprehension of speech. So a good idea to make flashcards for all these different parts of the brain that we're going through, and we'll continue. I'm going to keep this slide real simple. Basal nuclei, planning movements. So sort of like the staging area we saw in the premotor cortex. So your basal nuclei is deep in your brain, right? And that's responsible for planning movements. Don't worry about anything else it says. You can not worry about basal forebrain. That's fine. Limbic cortex or limbic system. Just think of emotion and behavior. I just scratch out, its memory is correct, but there's another area that's kind of want you to match memory. So your emotions and behavior, that's your limbic system. For example, let's take an infant. They're entirely limbic system, meaning you know exactly how they're feeling. They're either crying or smiling, right? So that their emotions are not hidden. As we mature, we learn how to suppress this. Right? You might be extremely happy but aren't showing it, or vice versa, right? Your frontal lobe will take over, but yeah, your limbic system is controlled by, or controls emotions and behavior, where the hippocampus and amygdala, right? So just match these two parts of the brain with long-term memory. I added this slide last semester because there were some questions on the final, which I didn't cover before. So just I bold typed basically your key phrase that you need to know. Posterior association area, that's spatial awareness of your body, where the anterior association area is thinking and making judgments, and where you understand what's socially acceptable. So kind of match those two areas with a function. Limbic system, of course, we already covered, emotions and behavior. So just, yeah, when you're making your flashcards, which would be a great thing to do, just there's your key words or your key phrases for each part of the brain on the slide. All right, so here's two senses that are perceived in the insula. Remember the insula, one of the 5 lobes that's hidden, that we can see here because we kind of opened up this lateral sulcus right there. Gustatory cortex. Gustatory is taste. So taste is perceived, or your gustatory cortex is in the insula. And also in the insula is your visceral sensory area. Visceral sensations, they're perceived in the insula. When we say visceral sensations, that's sensations coming from our organs. For example, an upset stomach, a full bladder, right? That's organ sensations. So those are called visceral sensations in the insula, along with taste. So match insula with gustatory or taste and visceral sensations.